الحمد لله وكفى وسلام على من لا نبي بعده ولا أمة بعد أمته ولا كتاب بعد كتابه ولا شريعة بعد شريعته ولا صحابة بعد صحابته ولا أهل بيت بعد أهل بيته. وقال النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وصحبه وسلم: اللهم اكفني بحلالك عن حرامك واغنني بفضلك عمن سواك. وقال الله تعالى في القرآن المجيد والفرقان الحميد بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم إن زلزلة الساعة شيء عظيم. وقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم كما ورد في البخاري والمسلم: كان زكريا عليه السلام نجارا. بارك الله لنا ولكم في القرآن العظيم ونفعنا وإياكم بالآيات والذكر الحكيم. إنه تعالى جواد كريم ملك بر رؤوف رحيم ورب حليم. و به قول حضرت اقبال لاهوری: چونی دور آسمان که کم دیده باشد که جبریل امین را دل خراشد، چه خوش دیری بنا کردند آنجا که پرستد مؤمن و کافر تراشد. و به قول حضرت مولانا جلال الدین بلخی رومی: مسلمانا مرا جانی از سودایی، مسلمانا مرا جانی از سودایی، چو طوفان بر سرم بارد از این سودا زبالایی. مسلمانا به هر روزی یکی شوری، به کوی لولیان افتد از آن لولی سرنایی. مسلمانا امانت دست من گیرید که مستم ره نمیدانم بدا معشوق زیبایی. مسلمانا به کوی او سپاریدم، مسلمانا به کوی او سپاریدم، بر آن خاکم بخسبانید زان خاکس بینایی. مسلمانا زبانی فارسی گویم، مسلمانا زبانی فارسی گویم که نبود شرط در جمع شکر خوردن به تنهایی. بیا ای شمس تبریزی که بر دست این سخن بیزی. The Holy Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam, in a hadith that's narrated in the Jami' al-Tirmidhi compiled by Abu Isa al-Tirmidhi, who passed away in the 9th century or the 3rd century of Hijrah. A mukatib, kataba yukatibu mukatabatan, which was a slave trying to buy his freedom, came to جاء مكاتبا إلى علي رضي الله تعالى عنه وسأل عنه كيف أقضي دينه. He came to Sayyidina Ali رضي الله عنه and asked that, oh Sayyidina Ali, oh Imam Ali, how do I pay off my debt? And Sayyidina Ali said, أعلمك كما علمتني رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم, that I will teach you kalimatin tayyiba, I will teach you some pure phrases, some noble phrases, of which the Holy Prophet alayhi afdalu salawati wa akmal tahiyyat said. The Holy Prophet said, Allahumma akfini bihalalika an haramik. Allahumma akfini, hada fi'lu amr, min kafa yakfi, right? Allahumma akfini bihalalika an haramik. That, oh Allah, suffice me with your halal from your haram. As my Ustad, Shaykh Amin Qulwadiya says, that to understand the brilliance of the Prophet, look at his dua. Ad'iyah ma'thura aw qul ad'iyah masnuna. Right, Ibn Qayyim al-Jawzi has a whole book on it, as well as Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani radiyallahu anhuma. That if you want to understand the brilliance of the Prophet, look at how he approached God. Right, Allahumma kfini bihalalika an haramik. That, oh Allah, suffice me, that creates such a society, right, creates such halal, where there is no need to even go to haram. That is, make halal the standard. Now I want to give you an anecdote of Mughal India. I know that's sort of geographically different, but the great Mughal king, Muhammad Alamgir, Muzaffar Muhyiddin Alamgir Aurangzeb Badshah Ghazi, passed away in 1707. In today what is in Dakkan, or Aurangabad, he is Madfoon. He wrote a letter, he used to write letters to his children. They're now contained they're in Farsi, obviously. There was no Urdu back then, it was just Farsi and Arabic. In a volume called Ruka'at Alamgiri. Ruqa' comes from the word Ruqa' in Arabic, which means a patch of cloth. And the letters were sealed in these patches of cloth. And he wrote a letter to his son, Muhammad Muazzam Shah Bahadur. Right? Muhammad Alamgir ibn Shah Jahan ibn Jahangir ibn Muhammad Jalaluddin Akbar Ibn Muhammad Nasiruddin Humayun, Ibn Muhammad Zahiruddin Babar, Ibn Umar Sheikh Mirza, Ibn Sultan Abu Sa'id Mirza, Ibn Miran Shah, Ibn Taimur Lang. They were all from the descendants of Awlad Taimur, who came who did Ghazwa into into Hindustan. Anyways, Aurangzeb, he writes a letter to his son. And what's so phenomenal when we think about Islam in India, right, that in 1947 during partition, Muslims were about 37% of a population of about 400 million. Now it's, the entire subcontinent is about 1.6 billion if you include India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. But back then it was about 300, 400 million. Right, and after Atusal Musalmanu Hukumat ki baad, after 800 years of Muslim sovereignty and political rule over the broader South Asia, that started with the Umayyad, the Syrian Prince Muhammad bin Qasim, and ended with Bahadur Shah Zafar Thani, who was exiled by the British into Burma in 1857. Now, Muhammad Aurangzeb, he writes a letter to his son, and he asks that how do we now build Islamic values to the point where there's no need to go to haram? Right? That is, how do we make halal the center? Right? The goal is to not go to your mufti and ask for a fatwa to make haram halal. As we know, as the great Syrian Hanafi jurist of the 19th century, who lived at that tail end of the Ottoman Empire, Ahmed Zarqa, in a book called Sharh al-Qawa'id al-Fiqhiyya, which is a book explaining Hanafi jurisprudence and legal theory, right? Taking from Ibn Abidin, the last great Hanafi Grand Mufti of Damascus, الضرورة تبيح المحظورات, right? الضرورة تبيح المحظورات, right? That necessity allows the forbidden things. But when we look at the history of Islam, right? The history of Islam tells us that when Muslims came into any land, they did not look towards the haram. What they did was they created the halal as the highest ethical and the most accessible. When the Prophet said, ad-deenu yusr, right? That deen is easy. The goal is to not make deen easy, but to make life easy for people so they can practice Islam. Now, let me give you a straight sociological example from Islamic history. Now, we know that as-salat bil-jama'ah in the Hanafi madhab is sunnah mu'akkada. In the madhab of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, it's wajib, as Ibn Qudama tells us in his Al-Mughni. We know in the Shafi'i and Maliki madhab, it's sunnah, right? They don't have sunnah mu'akkada as the Hanafis do. Now, the goal was not to say that, okay, let's stop people from coming to the masjid, or it's okay, you don't have to go to the masjid. What did they do? They built a masjid in every single street in the Muslim world. Go to in Palestine, go to Yafa, go to Haifa, go to Akka, go to Nasirah, right? Go to Jerusalem. Every single street there's a masjid, right? Go to Hyderabad. In every single old street there's a small little masjid. Go to Herat, go to Mazari Sharif, right? Go to Isfahan, go to Tehran. Every single, go to Cairo, go to Casablanca, go to Rabat. Every single street you'll see a little masjid that has stretched back for 1,000 years, right? So how do we now ask ourselves, right, to build a society where we're not justifying haram, right? And we all know about the social epidemic that plagues our community. Different types of illnesses, right? Spiritual illnesses, physical illnesses, right? That plague not only our youth but our elders as well, right? Where now the people are asking for fatwas to sort of justify other people's actions. That was never the goal, right? That we don't bring Islam to us, but rather we come to Islam where Islam is, right? What does Iqbal say? Chuni dawra asman ki khamdi dabashad, ki Jibreel amin ra dil kharashad, che khush dairi bina kardan danja, ki parastad mu'mina kafir tarashad. Chuni dawra asman ki khamdi dabashad. Iqbal Lahori says that the heavens have never seen such a sight. He's talking about the Murur al-Zaman al-Islami, or Murur al-Zaman al-Muslimi, the sort of Muslim passage of time, of how Muslims have impacted each and every society from Spain until South Asia, or even Samarkand and Bukhara, right? Agar Shehzadai Hindam Farogh Chashme Manas, Zakhaki Paki Bukhara, Kabul, Tabriz, as Iqbal said. But anyways, right, so Iqbal says, Chuni Dawra Asman, the heavens have never seen such a sight. Ki Jibreel Amin Ra Dil Kharashad, that even the heart of Jibreel alayhi salam trembles. Why does he tremble? Che khush dairi bina kardan danja. That, quoting Jibreel alayhi salam, Iqbal says that Jibreel looks at the al-Hadara Islamiyya, this Islamic civilization, right? That what a wonderful civilization that Muslims have built wherever they went. Jahan bhi jaate the, hai na? कितना अच्छा घर बनाया था मुसलमानों के वास्ते. And this ghar is a symbolic, metaphorical house, right? How did Muslims within South Asia, despite being a minority, create a culture where Muslim values were at the pinnacle of every single dimension of life, right? Theological, literary, artistic, musical, architectural, right? Every single element of life, the values of Islam, al-qiyam al-islamiyya, right? As the Arabs say, al-qiyam al-islamiyya, right? Qiyam comes from qama yaqumu, to stand, right? The values that shoot the society up to the sky. Right? Because when the Holy Prophet ﷺ went to the heavens and came back, what did the great 16th century Mughal theologian said, Mulana Abdul Quddus Gangohi? He said that the proof of the prophethood of the Holy Prophet is that when he went to the heavens, and what are the first ones? وَالنَّجْمِ إِذَا هَوَى مَا ضَلَّ صَاحِبُكُمْ وَمَا غَوَى وَمَا يَنطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَىٰ عَلَّمَهُ شَدِيدُ الْقُوَىٰ ذُو مِرَّةٍ فَاسْتَوَىٰ وَهُوَ بِالْأُفُقِ الْأَعْلَىٰ. When the Prophet reached the Ufuq al-A'la, the highest horizon, right? لَا زَمَانَ وَلَا مَكَانٍ. There is no space and no time there, right? بِالْأُفُقِ الْأَعْلَىٰ. When the Prophet reached Sidratul Muntaha, or the lotus tree, the Prophet came back, right? That the Mughal alim said that this is the proof of his prophethood. If any one of us had gone to that height, would we have came back? Right? This is the concept of the majdoob, or the person who's so enraptured by God that he loses his mind. Right? And this is what we call the prophetic consciousness. So when we think about that, the goal again is to reiterate this: is that how do we make Islamic values normative? Right? When we say that وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ, this rahmah that we understand in a very, I want to say, narrow and confined way. This rahmah is not just about treating people right. That this is important. I accept that this is also important. But this rahmah also applies at a much more macro and social level in any given society, where prophetic values, right, are not just for Muslims, but for all of mankind. And that's why when you look at the Sharia, these Mahakim al-Shar'iyya, or the Sharia courts in Mughal India, the average person who's coming to the Qadi is not the Musalman. It's the Hindu, the Buddhist, and the Sikh, and the Jain. When we have legal documents, they're known as Mazharnamas. These are legal documents that talk about civil law, penal laws, etc., right? All of this stuff. Why were Hindus coming to our Sharia courts in India? To get justice from a Hanafi Qadi, right? I mean, is it that the same thing is happening in Ottoman Damascus? The Masihiyyin are coming to the Hanafi Qadi or to the Shafi'i Qadi in Damascus or in Halb, right? Or same thing in Cairo, right? Or even in Andalus. And we have physical archival data that literally tells us this. So now we have to again ask, and so when we read Iqbal or we read Maulana Rumi, I read his ghazal. I want to translate it at the end. And truly, when every ghazal of Maulana Rumi that you read, it feels like the entire structure of Islam is able to sum up in 8 sentences, right? What do they say? Masnaviyye, ma'naviyye, hast Quran dar zubane Pahlavi. That the Masnavi of Maulana Rumi hast Quran dar zubane Pahlavi. But Pahlavi is the name for Old Parsi. Before the Arabs, Sayyidina Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas conquered Iran, Pahlavi is the old name for Persian. That they say that Maulana Rumi's Masnavi is the Quran in Farsi. Right? That he's able to contain but what is he containing? Right? The Islamic ethical values, right? Of which to build society, right? In as much as that Muslims need law, Maulana Rumi understood that Muslims needed literature, right? Something to speak to the aesthetic needs of a human being. Musalmana, mara jani as-sawdai. He says, "O Muslims, mara jani as-sawdai." He says that I have this. It's so hard to translate. Mara jani as-sawdai, that I have a sort of profit-bearing soul. That let me tell you of a way to gain profit. Sawda, right? We have the word in Urdu sud to mean interest, literally profit, right? Musalmana, bishuyid az dile man dast, right? Literally become through my hand, become my heart, right? Musalmana, amanate daste man giri, that take the amana from my hands. And this amana is so important, right? When we again come back to the dua of the Prophet, right? And as people like Imam Jalaluddin al-Suyuti tells us, that the most brilliant person of any given ummah is the Prophet. Whether that's Sayyidina Salih, Sayyidina Hud, Sayyidina Musa, they were the most brilliant people of their nation, right? Amanate daste man giri, that take this amana from my hands. Because this is truly what makes Islam different, is that we have an amana. إِنَّا عَرَضْنَا الْأَمَانَةَ عَلَى السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَالْجِبَالِ فَأَبَيْنَ أَن يَحْمِلْنَهَا وَأَشْفَقْنَ مِنْهَا وَحَمَلَهَا الْإِنسَانِ. Or insan is amanat ko utha liya. Right? That insan has come and carried this amana, this trust. Right? And what is this trust? We have to again turn back to the Quran, the second page on the 10th line of Surah Ahzab. What does Allah say? وَإِذْ أَخَذْنَا مِنْكَ مِنَ النَّبِيِّينَ وَمِن نُوحٍ وَإِبْرَاهِيمَ وَمُوسَى وَعِيسَى بْنِ مَرْيَمَ وَأَخَذْنَا مِنْهُ مِيثَاقًا غَلِيظًا. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say? That we took a covenant. Right? What is this? So that means that every single act in our lives returns to this covenant of Allah with 5 prophets. Every act, كل فعل وكل قول يرجع إلى هذا الميثاق. Right? Every act and every speech returns back to this covenant. And Allah says, we took a covenant with the Prophet Muhammad Mustafa alayhi salatu wasalam, with Sayyidina Nuh, with Sayyidina Ibrahim, with Sayyidina Musa, وَأَخَذْنَا مِنْهُ مِيثَاقًا غَلِيظًا. And we took a shadid covenant, ghalid, to mean sakht. Right? We took this embodied covenant with the prophets. Right? And what does this covenant do? It creates values back to the heavens. That means that every fard in Islam, right? Every wajib in Islam, every sunnah in Islam mirrors the heavenly cosmos, right? These are ethical values from God, right? In which not only is there metaphysical or cosmic benefit, but there is also physical, right? And terrestrial and earthly benefit as well, right? And this is why we needed a prophet, right? To mirror our lives with the heavens. And again, coming back to this hadith, Allahumma kfini bihalalika an haramik. Look at what the Prophet said. That, oh Allah, give us such halal that we don't even need to look at haram. Let us not even consider haram in any given society. Whether that's food, whether that's economics, right? Whether that's Islamic finance, right? Why do we need to short sell stocks, right? Can we not be creative enough to think about different ways of economic practices? Right? That our Muslims are كانوا سكر الحداثة. Right? Are Muslims so intoxicated with modernity that كانوا يقلدون الغرب, you know, في الماضي وفي الحاضر, that in the past 200 years, right, just blindly adopting every single value. This is not to say that we are simply rejecting every single thing that comes to us, but rather the task of the alim, the task of the scholar, is to look at every single thing that is external to Islam and judge. Does it make sense for this to enter into Islam? Right? We think about mantiq, right? Or Aristotelian logic. And you can read Imam al-Ghazali's Al-Iqtisad fil-I'tiqad on this, or Ibn Taymiyyah's Kitab al-Rad' al-Mantiqiyyin. You know, this really vast tradition, or even the Mughal Maulana Muhibbullah Bihari from Bihar, his Sullam al-Ulum, which took Imam Ghazali's logic to the literally Sullam al-Sama, or the stairs of heaven, right? When you think about just the entry of logic into the Islamic world, right? When scholars debated that, should we even use this, right? Because the goal was to think that, look, hey, we have an entire metaphysics, we have an entire religion. Does this make sense? And the scholars said that yes, it does make sense, right? Because every scholar, every Muslim needs to be critical, right? Needs to be a critical human being. That do these values make sense, right? Does it make sense to blindly adopt any new technological advancement, right? This is not to say that we reject everything, but rather to say that, look, hey, if we are going to adopt this, what are the spiritual, what are the physical, what are the mental health ramifications of this on the human body, right? And that is what fiqh does. Fiqh creates culture. And you can trace this throughout any given Islamic land. That the mufti is creating culture through his fatwa, through legal theory, whether that's any of the four madahib. بارك الله لنا ولكم في القرآن العظيم ونفعنا وإياكم بالآيات وذكر الحكيم إنه تعالى جواد كريم ملك الرؤوف الرحيم رب حليم. الحمد لله وكفى وسلام على من لا نبي بعده ولا أمة بعد أمته ولا كتاب بعد كتابه ولا شريعة بعد شريعته ولا صحابة بعد صحابته أما بعد فقد قال الله تبارك وتعالى في القرآن المجيد والفرقان الحميد بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وعد الله الذين آمنوا منكم وعملوا الصالحات لا يستخلفنكم في الأرض كما استخلف الذين من قبلهم. And I also wanted to turn your attention to one more sort of historical practice of Muslims and Islamic history is so important. I cannot tell you that for whatever reason Muslims today think that we live in a vacuum, that somehow the problems or the challenges that we face today were never faced by Muslims before. I mean, we have 14 centuries of Islam in any given society, whether that's with Zoroastrian or Hindus or Sikhs or Christians, Greek Orthodox, Armenians, etc. Right? So how is it such that Muslims have become so negligent of their past that people think that nothing has happened in 13 centuries, right? And I would argue, and this is just my own opinion, is that one of the main reasons why Muslims lack intellectual confidence about their tradition is because of the lack of engagement with their past, with their history. We can think about Ibn Khaldun, radiallahu anhu, the Sahib Kitab al-Ibar, right? The author of the Muqaddimah. He came and met Taymuri Lang, the ancestor of the Mughals in Damascus. And just reading that conversation in his Muqaddimah would blow your mind away. The questions and the answers and the challenges and the social and the theological issues that they dealt with would absolutely blow your mind away. Right? Just think, taking someone like Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi, right? The great Shafi'i polymath. I would count him as one of the 5 most brilliant human beings of mankind after the prophets. But today, I mean, who even knows even 2 of his works, right? Nobody has thought about human existence the way Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi has. Even I would argue more than Imam al-Ghazali, right? And again, it always comes back to this, that how do we make prophetic values in every single sphere and dimension of life to be the most elevated, to be idealized, right? Where in any given society, non-Muslims look at Muslims and say that, what is this? What do they have that we don't have? Right? And that again goes back to that mithaq, to that covenant that the prophets took, and all of our fiqh goes back to the prophet. And all of the prophet's knowledge, وَمَا يَنْطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ. وَمَا يَنْطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ. The prophet does not speak from his own side, from his own whims. إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَىٰ. All of this is revelation. So that means all of the prophetic values comes from revelation. That is, how should we live our lives so that we can, not necessarily that we have joy, but rather we have sakina or peace. And that peace is not just individual. That Muslims have never been selfish about joy or happiness or peace, but it has always been collective, right? To build a society based on prophetic values. And that what that can do for any given society. I don't have the time to tell you just about Mughal India, about what Muslims did to South Asia, that even today, that no Hindu, no Sikh, no Buddhist can escape the ripples of Islamic civilization. And they don't even realize when they say the word Raham. In Punjabi and even in Telugu, they have the word Bayram from the word Rahma, in mercy, right? That's just linguistically, right? And that's just one dimension of life, right? Of how Muslims in South Asia, in Tariqi Hindustan, I'm not talking about modern India, but Tariqi Hindustan, of what Muslims were able to achieve from Babur to Bahadur Shah Zafar tak, right? That in 1947 there were, 40% of that subcontinent was Muslim. How did that happen? Right? But one thing is just having people identify as Muslims, and another thing is you have an entire society based on Islamic values, where halal is the ideal, and we don't need to go to haram. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين واستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن سيدنا ومولانا وحبيبنا ومحبوبنا ومنظومنا ومقصودنا محمد وعلى آله الذين قاموا بنصرة الدين القويم وعلى صحبه الذين هم آووا برسول الكريم. وقال النبي عليه أفضل الصلوات وأكمل التحيات: وقال النبي عليه الصلاة والسلام: أشدهم في أمر الله عمر، وأصدقهم حياء عثمان، وأقضاهم علي رضوان الله تعالى عليهم أجمعين، وفاطمة سيدة نساء أهل الجنة، والحسن والحسين سيدا شباب أهل الجنة، وحمزة أسد الله وأسد رسوله. اللهم اغفر للعباس وولده مغفرة ظاهرة وباطنة لا تغادر ذنبا. الله في أصحابي لا تتخذوهم غرضا من بعدي، فمن أحبهم فبحبي أحبهم، ومن أبغضهم فببغض أبغضهم، وخير أمتي قرني ثم الذين يلونهم ثم الذين يلونهم. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم والأموات. اللهم انصر من نصر دين محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم، واخذل من خذل دين محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. اللهم عليك أعداء الدين، اللهم عليك أعداء الدين. يا مقلب القلوب ثبت قلوبنا على طاعتك، يا مقلب القلوب ثبت قلوبنا على دينك. وقال الله تعالى في القرآن المجيد: إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. واذكروا الله يذكركم وادعوه يستجب لكم، ولذكر الله تعالى أعلى وأولى وأعز وأجل وأهم وأتم وأكبر، والله يعلم ما تصنعون. أقيموا الصلاة.